Hi, this is Runa, and you're listening to the Changemakers podcast, where we share tips, insight, tools, and stories from other changemakers designed to motivate you to become the change you want to see in your world. Make sure you join our Changemakers community at runamagnus.com/podcast. And now, this is your time to sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Meet my guest, Farah Pandith, the author, foreign policy strategist, and a former diplomat. A world-leading expert and pioneer in countering violent extremists. She served as a political appointee under the Presidents George H.W. Bush and Barack Obama. And most recently, she was the first ever special representative to Muslim communities, serving both Secretaries Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. I had to get Farah on our podcast, sharing her experience and sharing her view on how can we let go of hate and create a world that is more inclusive. In her book, How We Win, How Cutting-Edge Entrepreneurs, Political Visionaries, Enlightened Business Leaders, and Social Media Mavens Can Defeat the Extremist Threat, is a must to read if you are interested at all into how can we create a world that is more inclusive, sustainable, and magnetic. Have fun listening to Farah sharing her wisdom. All right, Farah, thank you so much for being the guest on our Changemakers podcast. It's such a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
I was so intrigued when I heard about your book, How We Win, How Cutting-Edge Entrepreneurs, Political Visionary, Enlightened Business Leaders, and Social Media Mavens Can Defeat the Extremist Threat. And wow, if that does not speak to me, that does not speak to what is happening in the world regarding this endless us and them and this just division that is, it's just killing us. Oh.
Yes, really. It's unfortunate that we have to even be talking about these things. It seems like a normal, rational thing that communities would want to build stronger connections with each other. And here we are in 2019. The world is more divided than ever. There are all kinds of trouble that arises because of this us versus them. But it also is not just an unpleasantness when you're sort of living in but there's also now an added element of danger, right? Because we've seen the weaponization of us versus them. And so, yes, I agree with you. I mean, I think talking about these issues is really important. And I think that this first opportunity to tell my story in terms of what I saw around the world when I was traveling throughout the globe, when I was at the State Department, I hope will allow people to get an insight into some of the complexity of situations that are happening and the similarity of the us versus them, rise around the world.
Yeah. Why don't we start with the beginning of how did you originally go into this project? And somehow I am assuming, I'm sorry if I'm assuming here a little bit too much maybe, but it feels to me like this was something that was handed over to you, and it's been a revolution for yourself as you've gone through this journey. Am I?
Yeah. I like how you said that. I would never, no one ever plans a life and a profession, and you certainly don't want to plan something based on something as horrific as 9/11. But when that happened, obviously we think of the world now as a pre-9/11 experience and a post-9/11 experience. And in the aftermath of 9/11, I wanted to serve my nation, and I came back into government as somebody who was an American who is interested in making sure that you can do all you can when you've been attacked in such a way. But I'm also a Muslim, and so the idea that some terrorist organization was trying to use and define my country that I feel very proud about, and my religion, trying to define it by their evil ways, I knew I had to do more. So I came back into government right after 9/11 and had and stayed in government in various forms at the White House and at the U.S. Agency for International Development and obviously at the State Department, where my last position was developed for me by Hillary Clinton, and I was the special representative to Muslim communities, which is a position that was created, for the first time in American history to do exactly this, to engage around the world. So that's my path back in. It really came from a position of there's surely more that I can be doing after our country was attacked. I didn't have any idea that I would stay as long as I did, but it was the most provocative moment in time as we were talking about all of these issues around ideology, but also, as you just said, for me personally, really, I learned so much about what was possible and what we can do. And also it opened my eyes to the rise of hate around the world. And it really makes me really feel, now that I'm not in government, that the coalitions that we have to build around fighting hate have to come not just from government. Everybody thinks government's going to solve everything. Government has a role to play, and it's an important role. But the rise of extremism, communities themselves and the private sector needs to do far more to push back against this ideology. And I feel strongly about that, seeing what I saw from 2003 until 2014.
Yeah, exactly. In your book, How We Win, you do go through both the story behind it, and what you learned. And not that I do really want to give you a big round of applause for the book, because I think the book is so interesting. It tells a story in a way that, well, at least I had not a deep insight on. I would assume that I was a bit like a lot of people. You knew the 10% of the iceberg, like I like to say. You knew,
yes,
but you didn't really know all the things that were going on underneath the surface and this complexity that happened. Yes. What do you see? What are the keys that every single one of us, and I'm saying every single one of us because the things that we say, the change makers, we talk about, we are empowering humans to become the change that they want to see in their world, just to give you a context into what I'm meaning. But what can we as individuals do to stop this, or to reverse this, or at least build a world that is more inclusive?
Yes. Well, first, it's doing exactly what you have just said, which is articulating the world you want to see, and not putting your head down and thinking all these other things don't matter. All of these little things together formulate the ethos, the environment, the air that you breathe in terms of what you want. And let's take it away from extremism for a minute and make it just sort of the most basic thing. If you think about perhaps, the idea of being more green in a city, or even an individual making a difference, how you can't turn a city all of a sudden into a green city. It's individual actions that make that so. There are policies and laws and all that kind of stuff you can do, but it's teaching somebody how to recycle, it's making it possible for them to do things. So it's individual actions. And so when I think about the issue of hate, and I think about us versus them, your question is essential. It is, what can I do as we live our daily lives to ensure that we are making choices, that it's making choices on the world we want to live in. It's not responding and saying we want peace, or we want inclusion, or it's what's the choice that you are making to do that. And it's not that you have to hold hands every day and wait for a rainbow to appear and, and it's not necessarily that, but it is deciding how you're raising your awareness, what you're seeing around you, what you act upon when something, when there is that conflict of us versus them, even in the minor ways, in a line at Starbucks, as you are walking down the street and you see people cross over because somebody is of a different race or looks different than you. It's how you talk. One of the most important things that people don't think about is the language that they use to describe, quote, the other. And I ask people to really think about that. And I can only use, here we are having an interview in English. So, the choices that you make in the English language, for example, many people talk about. And, the work that I did was to fight organizations that use the name of Islam to recruit. So an Al-Qaeda or a so-called Islamic State. There are many different, obviously, types of extremism. And we're seeing a rise of white nationalism and white supremacist movement. So there is something to be said about that too. But really on the piece that I focused on with these types of terrorist organizations, they want you to use language that suggests an us and a them. They want you to say that the West or any of their elements are in war with Islam. They want you to suggest that Islam is a monolith. So when you use that kind of language, it helps those kinds of people recruit, because they can say, look at what they're saying, look at how they think of you. And we have to be conscious of that, not just because terrorist organizations manipulate words of all kinds, not just presidents, and senators and elected officials, but even regular people. I look at, I'll make it very personal for you. I mean, I remember being in college and in graduate school and using the terminology Muslim world. And I didn't think anything about it. That's what we learned. That's how we studied. It was very normal. It was normalized. Arab world, Muslim world. We just used that interchangeably, and we didn't think about it. But let's think about it for just 5 seconds, right? There are more Muslims that live outside of the Middle East than in it, right? So to suggest that all Muslims are Arab is obviously incorrect. So why are we using that terminology to describe all Muslims, okay? Yeah. Or let's take it one step further. Every Arab is not a Muslim. So, let's think about that too. But let's go one step even further. The terminology Muslim world is so problematic. It's convenient. It's quick. People understand what they think you're saying. But if you just think about it for 5 seconds, what you're saying here is there is a special world that Muslims live in, and it's over there. Rather than saying there are Muslims that live in every part of the world and they're part of our community. So that's one example. It's not the only example, but I want us to raise our consciousness. I want us to choose to be more inclusive in everything that we do.
I love that. To choose to be more inclusive. Farah, as we are recording this, we, the Changemakers, we are planning the month of May, the month where we are empowering other Changemakers to stand up and be the change. And we're doing it under the tagline, "May the change be with you."
Oh, I love that. I love it. And as a Star Wars fan and as a human, I love it.
Yeah, may the change be with you. And, we just, one of the things with change is that many people become really afraid when you talk about change, as if it's something terrible that's going to happen. But we want to do this in a fun, light way. But what you're just saying, Farah, is so spot on, because one of the things that we absolutely want to draw attention to is our language. I mean, you draw up a picture that is so spot on, and that is creating this, just, I don't know, it's like a fairy tale in your head, basically. But another thing that happens when you become more aware of the energy.
Yes.
The energy that we are giving out, the signals that we're giving out when we say things like that.
Exactly. It's very powerful. It's very powerful what you've just said. And giving agency to an us versus them is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. So you can't just build a foundation and say, this is what we're doing, this is a mission statement, when everything else is missing the key aspects of this, right? Yeah. So I think you're right. People are afraid of change. They're afraid of things that they don't know. Yeah. And so there you come back to the question that you're asking about, like, what can every individual do? Trying your best to embrace, newness and meeting new kinds of people and doing all that requires effort on everyone's part, and normalizing that idea of not only being around the same kinds of people that you're always used to, and opening that avenue of conversation with people who are different, whether it's different on levels of, gender or sexuality or race or heritage or whatever it happens to be. it's really going all in and finding ways that every component, every touch point in the community doesn't suggest an us versus them. That is the only way we're going to be able to see change with the kind of numbers that we're seeing rise right now around the world on hate. The hate statistics are frightening. And so much more needs to happen. Much more needs to happen. And it has to happen with all of us. It cannot just be one dimension of society. It cannot just be community groups. It cannot just be educators. We cannot just keep being lazy on hate and suggesting it's somebody else's problem to be able to deal with this. We have to take responsibility and take the actions that, even if they're scary, that we choose to take because we know what we want to see around us.
Yeah. And remembering as well that everything that we do today or we don't do today, which is just as important, is going to be our legacy tomorrow.
Exactly. And people have a very hard time projecting into the future of what could happen if we don't take action now. We did this with the environment, and we are now in a situation that's really at the crisis point, right?
Yeah.
And had we been listening, 30 years ago and making change then, the kind of change that would have been required, small, efforts that we could have made would have made a gigantic difference. The cognition, the realization, the understanding of, plastics in this water or whatever, plastic straws, whatever the thing now that people are embracing. I look at this and I say, you saw a rise of us versus them on one kind of hate spectrum. As if that wasn't enough, we are now seeing, we're on the heels of the New Zealand attack. We're now seeing this rise. We're seeing that the groups of white supremacists meet in Finland as a mass entity. They are learning from each other. So now we don't just have groups that are radicalizing young Muslim kids. We're seeing groups who are radicalizing an entire different demographic of young people. Like, how many more are we going to allow to have happen before we see the crisis that we will not be able to then, control in a way that is easy. And today, fighting hate to me is really basic. It is a choice that we are making as communities on what we want to be and who we are as humans.
I could talk to you forever. This is so good. This is so, I encourage our listeners to go ahead, get a copy of her book, How We Win, and start to think about what is it that you want to be known for? What is it that the legacy that you want to leave behind when you're no longer above the green side of the earth? Just remember that we all have a choice, and we can choose to say, no, I'm not going to go for this, even though that I'm scared because I don't know that person. I've never seen a person of this color or has this faith or whatever it is, but I'm willing to be curious, and I'm willing to explore, and I'm willing to give that space in my heart that there's another individual there that should be shining just as much as I should be, allowing myself to shine.
That's such a wonderful way of putting it. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you, and thank you so much. I'm looking forward to being part of your movement, and I thank you so much for including me.
Oh, you are a change maker already, and may the change be with us all.
I agree. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Speak later. Bye.
Was this podcast of value for you? I sure hope so. If so, feel free to share the love and give us your generous review on iTunes or Stitcher. And remember that you can always go to runamagnus.com to find out more about the Changemakers and how we can help you drive the change you want to see in your world.